In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to cut a binding strip out of your own fabric. So what I'm doing here is I'm showing you how to find a 45-degree angle. So I've got a 90-degree angle and then it folds across to make a 45. With the stripy fabric it's really easy because you can just follow the lines and the stripes. So just showing you how to do it. Once you've got it, then you give it a gentle press. I've already cut this before on a longer length, so I'm just going to show you how to do it. So that's my 45-degree angle already cut previously. So once I've cut the line, I'm just going to measure across. Now it depends how wide you want your binding to do. I'm going to do a double binding because I just find them so much easier to do and so much easier to sew on. So for my double binding, I want it quite narrow, so I've measured 4 centimeters across. Okay, and then mark the 4 centimeters and then draw a line like you see I've done, and then just gently press your binding in half. Now I just pat the iron down. I don't run the iron along because sometimes it can stretch the binding and you don't want a buckled edge along the fold line. So you want to make sure your fold line is completely crease free and no buckles. And then I'm just going to cut along to release my binding. So what you can do is you can cut several strips and you can sew them all together at a 45-degree angle and press them all, and then you've got one really long strip if you're going round the hem of something, or you just need to cut more binding strips, okay, and join them. So that's my binding strip. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how to sew on. So I'm going to sew on at 1/2 centimetre seam allowance. So it's 4 centimetres wide. So now it's 2 centimetres wide because it's folded completely in half. Just make sure you've got plenty at the end. And then I'm going to just sew on to the inside of my garment here. So I'm just binding the top of a little corset I made several years ago, and now I've got the chance to actually finish it. So as you can see, I'm just sewing it on at 1/2 centimetre seam allowance. I want a really quite small binding on the top of this little corset, so I'm trying to keep it quite small. You can go smaller, narrower, or you can go wider. It's completely up to you, but this double binding works really nicely if your fabric is quite fine. So my fabric is just a cotton, probably a cotton poplin or similar to that. So it just looks better if you can make it out of self fabric rather than just buying one from the shop and putting a different fabric unless you wanted a contrast. So as you can see, I'm just very, very carefully sewing along the top of the corset. And the great thing about a bias binding is it will follow the shape, so there should be no buckling at all. So you try not to stretch it as you sew it on. And I always use something like this. I would use a size 2 or a nice small stitch when you get to the edge, little back stitch, and then cut it. So remember, I've sewn this to the inside, the wrong side, and then I'm going to fold it over this raw edge. I'm going to cut it off, leaving about 1 centimetre on at one end, and that allows me to tuck that end in. So very neatly tuck it in and then tuck it over. Okay, and then you want to bring the folded edge over, the neatly folded edge over, so it's in line with the line that you've just stitched. So it's going to be fractionally, only fractionally over the line that you've just stitched to completely hide it. So make sure the end is really lovely and neat. Sometimes you may want to pin this. As you can see, I haven't pinned it, but I've been sewing bindings for many years. So I haven't done one for quite some time though, so hopefully this will turn out okay. So just hold it in place and just do a couple of stitches forward and then a couple of stitches back. Okay, and then very gently and very, very close to the edge, you want to top stitch this, just catching the edge. So you're going to sew right along the fold, as close to the fold line as possible, and then just make sure that it folds, the binding folds over the top and just covers your previous stitch line, so it hides everything. And there's only a slight shaping to the top of this corset, so as you can see I'm just gently pulling the binding and then tucking it over the top edge, and there's a little bit of shaping. So the beauty of a bias cut binding is it will follow the shaping really nicely. So you could use this on a neckline, around an armhole. You could do the top of a decorative pocket. You can use bindings around waistlines and that. There's just a really nice finish to finish a curved edge. But if it is a curved edge like an armhole and a neckline, you would always cut it on the bias, which is obviously the 45-degree angle. So yes, you could bind around the edge of a whole garment if you wanted to. It's a really, really nice finish, especially if you got it nice and narrow and nice and cleanly done. So as you can see there, I'm just about to cut the edge off, so I've got another 1 centimetre overhang. Clip off any little bits of threads, and then that will need tucking in as well really neatly. So it's a really nice finish to a garment if you want to. It can replace the facing. You can just bind around an armhole and a neck as well if you want to. But if it's neatly sewn, it's really nice. And if it's in self fabric, as you can see from the stripes, it's at a 45-degree angle, so it gives it a nice edge and a pattern at the top. So with this, I'm just holding it very carefully with a pin, and so I don't sew over my fingers. Get to the very end and then back stitch, and it should be absolutely fine. So I'm quite pleased with that. So my binding is probably only just about 1 centimetre wide at the top of this little corset, so it's nice and delicate. As you can see, it's following the curve and it's worked reasonably well, and I'm pleased with that.